He has sold over 15 million records worldwide and has 9 consecutive top 40 American hit singles. Montreal, Canada's very own Mr. Corey Hart. Corey, how are we doing tonight?
We are doing very well. Thank you for inviting me on your show.
Thank you, Corey. And you're calling me from Barcelona, huh?
Yes, Barcelona in Spain, where we are over here. We spend half the year in the Bahamas, and I am Canadian from Montreal, like you mentioned, but one of my daughters wants to play pro tennis, because I've got 4 kids, 3 girls and a boy, and my third daughter is 12, and she wants to play pro tennis, and we come over here to Spain because she trains over here.
Very cool. Now, I know you grew up in Canada, but you were raised in Mexico City and a part of Spain, correct?
I was born in Montreal, and as a young kid, we moved around a few different places, and I did spend a year in Spain when I was 5, and learned my Spanish there, and actually never forgot it. And then when I was about 9, I think, I spent a year in Mexico City, and then basically I the rest of my teenage years and through my 20s. Well, my career started in my early 20s, but lived in Montreal, my hometown.
Okay, and then let's just back up a little bit, Corey. I heard that one of your first musical experiences was actually singing for Tom Jones in Miami and doing some recording with Paul Anka. Is that true?
Yes, you've done your research, Mr. Buchanan.
I try, man. I try.
Yeah. Well, I'm the youngest of 5 kids in my family, and my older sister, 4 boys and a girl. My older sister was a Canadian figure skater and quite a successful one, and she was doing one of those ice capades or ice volley shows, and she got to meet Tom Jones, and they were kind of hanging out together a little bit, and then she said to him, my little kid brother sings, and I was only 11 or something like that at the time. And he sings all the time with the radio, and he's kind of cute, and would you like to listen to him? And from what my sister tells me, he said, yeah, no problem, have him come down to Miami at the Fontainebleau Hotel, and we'll set something up. And so the next week I was there, and I sang Ben by Michael Jackson for him, and then he said, you know what, I really can't help you, brother. I think he liked my sister, truthfully. He was interested in me at all. And he said, but, a fellow Canadian, because Tom knew that we were Canadian, his friend Paul Anka, and Paul Anka had written She's a Lady for Tom Jones, so there was a connection there between those two. And he recommended that Paul, who happened to be at the hotel at that very same time, to come down and see me, and he did, and Paul was really my first mentor, and really took me under his wing, and I was just a little kid, truthfully, and 11, you are a little kid. And I did go into the studio and cut a couple of songs with him in Las Vegas a few months later. And you can hear those too. My voice hadn't cracked. They're on my website.
All right, very cool. And then you went back to Canada and you signed with Aquarius Records. How did that recording contract come about?
Well, I was very determined to get a record deal. From the time I was 14, 15, 16, I was just relentless and tenacious. It was just something that I couldn't breathe without music. I lived and it was my sustenance. It was my best friend. It was actually my salvation, because my parents split up, and I was a pretty lonely kid, and music really was my refuge. So I went anywhere and everywhere that I could go to try and get a record deal. And I even took a trip to L.A. When I was 16 and saved up my money and took a flight out there by myself and went to L.A. and went to about 5 or 6 record labels. I told you I liked the Bee Gees, so I went to see RSO, which was Robert Stigwood's. And, they basically just told me to throw my cassettes into an unsolicited carton. And that was the extent of my record company success when I was 16. But finally, I eventually did get a record company to take notice of me, and that was Aquarius in Montreal.
Then I know your debut album, First Offense, was home to your very first debut hit single here in the United States called Sunglasses at Night, which stormed onto the American charts and hit number 7 on the national charts here in America in 1984. How did that single all come about, Corey?
Well, I recorded my first album in England, and we had finished the record. I didn't have an American deal, as I mentioned earlier, or you mentioned that I signed with Aquarius Records, which is a division of EMI, but it's an independent label in Canada. So the record was actually released in Canada and did not really do very well.
Mm-hmm.
And then, the Canadian label was saying, in those days, it was very, very hard for Canadian artists. There were very few Canadian artists that had American success. I mean, you could name them on your hand. The Guess Who, Joni Mitchell, and Gordon Lightfoot, but very, very few artists. It isn't like it is today,
right,
where a lot more Canadian artists have succeeded. I was, what was your question again? Because it is like 10:30 at night here, and I've been up since 6. So.
No worries, man.
I mean, I'm not going to say oops like Rick Perry, but I just need you to remind me. Where were we?
How did you come up with the song Sunglasses at Night?
Well, that song, what I was referring to was in Canada, the record had come out and was not a big success, and I really wanted the record to come out in America. EMI in America, in Los Angeles, were kind of looking at what the sales were like in Canada and wondering, are we going to do something with Corey or not do something with Corey? And I had the coveted spot of opening up for a Culture Club, who were, a very, very big, successful 80s act.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, and the American record executives came down to see me perform, and when they saw me perform, they gave me the American deal that same night. So it was actually really the first time that I had been on stage in such a big venue, because there was like 15,000 people. I was the opening act, and apparently did well enough that they signed me. Now, I wrote Sunglasses at Night when I got back from England because there was no sun over there, and I had these new shades that I bought over on Carnaby Street, which is a really hip area of London, and never got a chance to wear them. And I was just trying to be a rebel, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of where it came from.
Okay, cool. And your follow-up hit single to your quadruple platinum album, First Offense, was gigantic there in Canada, and it also did very well here in the States. The tune, It Ain't Enough, what's the background on that great single?
It Ain't Enough was one of the early songs that I wrote when I was about 17, and it's a love song when you listen to the lyrics, but in fact, the motivation behind that song is not being good enough for the record companies.
Oh, really?
That's the truth. I mean,
okay.
I didn't think that would make for a very interesting song to talk about, but It Ain't Enough was an expression that I would always say to myself, because I wasn't getting a record deal, and I was just saying it ain't enough. It ain't enough. Like, it's whatever I'm giving them, it's not good enough.
And I know on the First Offense album, you had the pleasure of doing a song with Eric Clapton. How did that all come about?
Well, I was very fortunate on my first record to have such talented producers, John Astley and Phil Chapman, working on the record. And they taught me so much, and they treated me so well, and brought such great musicians to the process, and really took me under their wing and encouraged me in every capacity, in every way, when I was over there. And we went strolling in the park, John and I. One day he lived in Twickenham with his daughters, his two young daughters, and we were in the park, and we were walking through the park, and then he just looked over to me and said, there was a song that we had finished up called Jenny Faye, which is a ballad. It's a poignant song, and he said to me, "I've got an idea for the song, Corey." And I said, "What?" And he says, "I think we should get Eric to come in and play on it." And I looked at him and I said, Eric who? And he said, Eric Clapton. And I was like, "No, you're not telling me. You're joking." And he's like, "No, I'm serious," because he had produced a record of Eric Clapton's, and they were friends.
Mm-hmm.
And he made a phone call, and he asked Eric, and then literally it's one of the highlights of my career. I remember every moment of that experience, and I remember it being in the control room and trying not to get in the way and staying in the corner while Eric was putting down his dobro guitar solo and his fills on the song. And while Eric was playing, he breathes. When he's recording, you could hear him breathing through the microphone.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, it was almost as if he was becoming one with the song. That was the way it felt when I was hearing him, because he just his soul was completely involved in that performance in that song. And then he finished his takes, and then he came into the control room, and like I said, I was off in the corner trying not to get in the way. And he looked over to me and he said, why are you hiding over there? And I was like, oh, I don't want to get in the way. And he said, Corey, you really wrote one very, very pretty song there.
Wow.
And I'll never forget that. Never forget that.
Yeah, it's a great, I mean, the internet is a great thing. The next great single spent 9 weeks at number 1 on the Canadian charts and hit number 3 here in the States. How did you come up with the tune Never Surrender?
Well, it's just part of who I am. It's like I described earlier. I was very tenacious and very persistent, and I believe very much in following your dreams. And sometimes that's not easy, and often you can lose faith. But at the end of the day, I always believe that you can stand up and fight for yourself. And it was something that I taught myself. My mom taught it to me when I was a little kid, and I always believed in it. And one of my heroes is Winston Churchill, and actually that's a phrase he coined and used during World War II to inspire his countrymen. You know, I borrowed it from a great man.
Great story, Corey. Great story. And the title track to your second album, Boy in the Box, is there an interesting story behind that tune?
There is, actually, because the original Boy in the Box was a radio DJ from Chicago, WLS, I believe was the station. His name was John Landecker.
I know John.
But I didn't know that at the time. When I was in Montreal, and it was in between. I was off tour on my first record, and I was writing songs for the second album. And my favorite station in Montreal was Top 40 radio station, and the disc jockey, a guy called Steve Anthony, he used to call himself the Boy in the Box. And when I heard him say that a few times on the radio. He'd say, "Hey, it's Steve Anthony, the Boy in the Box." And I was, I was influenced a lot by James Dean a lot at that time, because a lot of the press and people described me as being a James Dean type image-wise figure, and I was trying to write a song about James Dean, and actually that's what Boy in the Box is about.
And I know one of your idols was Elvis Presley. How did you come up with the idea or the concept of recording "Can't Help Falling in Love with You" when he's had so many hits? How did you connect with that one particular song yourself?
Well, it's a great question. I was in the studio doing my Fields of Fire album, which was my third album, and there was a jukebox that was given to me as a gift for, actually you had mentioned this earlier, for selling Diamond in Canada, which is a million units of my Boy in the Box album. And they had given me a Wurlitzer jukebox, a vintage jukebox that had all songs from the 50s and 60s in it. And the one I kept going back to and playing was Can't Help Falling in Love. And it was just a song that I would put on after the sessions just to relax and listen to it. And you know, I loved his voice. I really respect Elvis Presley. I think every entertainer, every musician breathing respects and admires him and feels empathy towards him. But that song was a comfort for me. And then one night, it was like, I don't know, 1 or 2 in the morning, and I was listening to it, because in those days I would record really late at night. Mm-hmm. And I said, I want to do this one. And then the record company was, no, Corey, you can't do an Elvis song. That nobody does Elvis songs. It's just not really smart move to do an Elvis song. And I'm stubborn, so I said, no, I want to do this song. I really want to do this song, and I'm going to do it, the way I feel it.
So, Corey, tell me what you're working on today.
Well, I got to put 2 kids to bed because it's 10:35, and my 8-year-old's saying, Dad's talking on the radio. That's really fun. You know what? I've been given a great opportunity with a label that was offered to me by Seymour Stein. He's the president of Sire Records, mm-hmm. And he signed. Oh God, he's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But he, amongst the many great artists that he signed were Madonna and the Pretenders, the Ramones, B-52s, the Talking Heads. I mean, the guy is a legend, and he's always been. Even though I was never on my career in America, for most of my career, I was on EMI and spent a little time on Sire for an album I had in 1992. And we've always been friends, and about 7 or 8 years ago, he called me up out of the blue, and he said, Corey, what are you up to right now? And I said, well, actually, Seymour, I just changed one of my daughter's diapers. Do you want to come over and help me? And I said, it doesn't smell too good. And he goes, no, but I have an idea for you. Would you be interested in running your own label? And I was perplexed. I was like, I'm not. I suck at math. I can't even add 10 and 15 without using my fingers. And I don't see myself being an executive and going into an office. And I've got my 4 kids, and they're young, and I want to raise them. He said, I think you would be great creatively running a label, and Warner would be, the marketing and the financing. So it was like too good to be true. I said, man, okay, no problem. So we formed the label. I called it Sienna Records in 2003, and just signed the first artist in 2000 and what year are we in now? 2009.
Okay.
And her record just came out in Canada about 4 months ago, and will come out in internationally sometime this year.
Oh, very cool.
She's an R&B singer. Yeah, she's really great. You can check her out. There's a track with Stevie Wonder on it, which is another highlights of my career. Definitely in the top 3.
Wow, very cool. And for more information on Corey Hart, you can always check out his website at CoreyHart.com. Mr. Corey Hart, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
It was my pleasure. I enjoyed chatting with you, and we can do this again another time. Maybe a little earlier in the day, so I'll be a little more coherent, not as rambling.